Wild Things, Chapter 2. It was a stifling Tuesday afternoon when Adeline Mae Pritchett marched into the Sonoya County Sheriff's office. She stood in the doorway, the full force of the sun at her back cutting through her sundress and carving her fine figure out of light. Gosh, but she was something to see. Everett, who'd been assisting with the archiving of old case files, found himself mesmerized. In fact, he was a bit ashamed by the sudden tightening in his privates. He'd quickly positioned the lower half of himself behind a cabinet as Adeline strutted further into the office, her intent gaze sweeping the small crowd of gaping mouths and curious eyes. Everett felt his heart begin to do something strange at just the idea of their eyes meeting. Adeline Mae Pritchett was doing something to him, something he had never experienced. And just by breathing, she moved over to the clerk, her stride like oil and vinegar. And as she got closer, Everett saw that her coffee-colored skin glistened with a light sheen of sweat, and her wild black curls were windswept, like she'd charged right through a tornado to get there. She was on a mission. Adeline unfurled her fist, where she'd been clutching a fold of bills, releasing it all onto the clerk's desk. "My sister," she said simply. Her voice was surprisingly deep and melodic, the sort that lingered in your skin. Everett had only heard voices like that in church on Sundays. "Now, Miss Pritchett," Wade began. "Wade Newland. Don't chew, Miss Pritchett me." Adeline speared Wade with a look that was meant to rattle him, but it was having an adverse effect on Everett. His heart felt like it was beating fast and slow all at once. His hands had gone clammy, and air was getting harder and harder to come by. "I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper," she said, her chest up, indignant, and just a touch haughty, like an older sister offended by the nerve of a younger sibling. God, she was a beauty, long-limbed and well-curved, firm but soft, like a woman ought to be. Her eyes were almond-shaped, pools of umber, just the kind to burrow their way deep into you and take root. Her lips were full and heart-shaped, a pair made for kissing, and the white and yellow sundress she'd chosen that Tuesday clung to her in parts, accentuating her full breasts and the breadth of her hips, giving life to some of Everett's most sinful thoughts. He suddenly had the urge to do something wild, to snatch this woman up and run off with her. He had never felt passion for anything but the law. Hell, he'd never truly felt lust, neither. But by God, this must be it. "Come on, Della. I'm at work," Wade whined. "And Sheriff Leafort says we're to hold her a minute on account of the charge." Through the fog of his yearning, Everett realized they were discussing Miss Hadley Ray Pritchett. He had witnessed Hadley being brought in earlier that morning, and her causing quite a ruckus after the sheriff himself had cuffed her. According to Sheriff Leafort, Hadley had been found doing much the same outside of the dilapidated camper Billy Madison called home, and she was being detained for making a public nuisance of herself and for indecent exposure, having had on little more than her slip and a pair of Billy's boots, too big for her to walk in, when she was picked up. Just like her sister, Hadley was a beauty, but not the same at all. She was a petite little thing, almost too scrawny for Everett's tastes, with none of the exaggerated curves of her sister's full-figured build. She did have the same windswept curls, but they were in a light shade of brown, almost red when the light caught 'em. And, a far cry from Adeline's inky, rich complexion, Hadley had golden brown skin, the color of browned butter, that made her look to be glowing, and she had a face like an angel, with these big, innocent brown eyes. That seemed out of place against her wildness and sheer ferocity. Looks aside, Hadley was clearly the antithesis of her sister, in temperament as well. Where Adeline had been a quiet force, Hadley had come in like a bull in heat, much less the heifer. Lord, the way she'd come in bucking and flailing and using language Everett had never known a lady to be capable of. There had only been a single moment that she'd managed to still herself, and Everett had seen that she was sporting a nasty bruise on her cheek. She was a fearless and feral spirit. That Hadley Ray, wrapped up in the prettiest of packages, And Everett knew plenty of men foolish enough to be ensnared by the idea of being the one to tame her. One look at that cheek told him that Billy Madison had tried and failed. Adeline seemed to mull over Wade's news. Then she nodded, having silently decided on a course of action. "Then I'll have a word with the sheriff." "He ain't here, Della," Wade offered. "Oh, I know where to find him," she said, her husky tone sharp with a quietly menacing edge. She retrieved the fold of bills, turned on her heels, and strutted right back the way she'd come, leaving Wade to breathe a sigh of relief. Once she'd left, Everett realized he was clutching one of the files hard enough that his nails nearly tore through the manila folder, and his hands were shaking something awful. He dreamt of her every night after that, every single night since she'd strutted into that office. He would wake up cool with sweat, the sensation of Adeline Buchan beneath him still alive in his skin, and the results of his desire spilled over his stomach or into his sheets. Or sometimes he'd wake with the dull ache of his need still heavy in his male parts, and naught but his hand to satisfy him, until he felt like he might die of wanting her. 2 weeks later, he'd worked up the courage to drive up to the Pritchett farm, and had found himself standing in front of Mr. Pritchett, asking permission to court his daughter. 5.5 months after that, he was engaged to Adeline May Pritchett. God help him. Thanks for listening to this excerpt from Wild Things. This story is available on Inkit.com, Wattpad.com, and Neobook.org. Visit any of those sites to like, comment, and review. Add Wild Things to your reading list to receive notification of upcoming chapters and to learn what happens next.